Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mr. Fred Kempe of Atlantic Council.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this special NATO leadership session, Preserving Peace, NATO's Role. My name is Fred Kempe. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council from Washington, D.C. On behalf of everyone at the Atlantic Council, I want to thank Sławek Dębski, the leader of the Polish Institute for International Relations, for this extraordinary venue and gathering. Thank you to PISM. Thank you to Sławek. I'm honored to partner with PISM here and each year at the Wrocław Global Forum. Thanks as well to my colleagues at GlobeSec, my friends Karen Donfried of GMF and Heather Conley of CSIS. I now have the distinct honor of introducing our three speakers. The Croatian President, Her Excellency Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, the President of the Republic of Latvia, His Excellency Raimons Vejonas, and the Prime Minister of the Republic of Montenegro, His Excellency Milo Đukanović. These are young countries, relatively new members of NATO. One is about to become the newest NATO member. They are pioneers. They are writing new pages of history for their countries, for their region, and for Europe. We are lucky to have such a talented trio here today. I will welcome each individually to the stage before their addresses to this impressive audience. First, let me introduce the President of Croatia, the fourth President of Croatia. To put that in some context, James Madison was the fourth President of the United States in 1809. She is the first woman to be elected President of the Republic. Madam President, we haven't achieved that yet in the United States, though if Secretary Albright has anything to say about it, we well might. You were the youngest president also elected at age 46. She is one of Europe's great Atlanticists, a true product of her country's history, its entry into Europe, and its friendship with the United States. She graduated from high school in the United States, where she was in an exchange program in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And she later attended George Washington University and Harvard while gaining degrees at the University of Zagreb. She served as Croatia's Minister for European Affairs, Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Integration. She was also Croatia's Ambassador to the United States and the first woman Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy in NATO. So you see, this history is the first pages of history of her country, and she's been writing them. But here's my favorite part. She was such a force in her job at NATO, where she was a pioneer in understanding the importance of public diplomacy and crafting a strategy for NATO's future. But she was such a force that I'm told her colleagues called her Swambo. Now pay attention, S-W-A-M-B-O. That stands for she who must be obeyed. In her first 2 years of office, she has been even more a force as president, championing a truly innovative and potentially historic project known as the Adriatic-Baltic Black Sea Initiative, and we're proud to be supporting that at the Atlantic Council. Please welcome President Grabar-Kitarović.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it really is so wonderful to be with you here today and to see so many young faces in the audience, leaders of the future, but leaders of today as well. And those of you who've been working with me for a number of years know how much attention and importance I pay to cooperation and educating the young people, because as we always say, we can never take security for granted. The past 24 hours, ever since I arrived to Warsaw in my capacity as President of Croatia, had been very emotional for me. As a girl who grew up on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain, to be coming to Warsaw, which was at the time symbols of resistance to what communism and lack of freedom stood for, to becoming as president as one of the countries who regained independence and started a transition from an undemocratic to a democratic system, and from a centrally planned economy to a market economy in the early 90s. And in the meantime, to become a member of the European Union and NATO is such tremendous honor and such a pleasure to be with you. I know that today we are really constrained by time, so I will try to keep my remarks very short, and I hope to get a question or two from the audience as well. So to briefly answer the questions that you posed in the introduction to this panel, let me first underline my understanding of NATO, or the phases that NATO has gone through. The first phase of NATO was since its founding, since its inception until the end of the Cold War, when NATO was a deterrent, basically, a static instrument that was very effective in deterring aggression, but also keeping the balance in the world and world peace. There was a brief intermediate phase after the end of the Cold War, of the so-called soul-searching, when a lot of people questioned the value of the continuation of NATO, and unfortunately some still do today. However, NATO became very engaged and very active in first reintegrating the space of Europe with the aim of creating Europe whole, free, and at peace, and in erasing the differences and the remnants of the Iron Curtain and of the Berlin Wall. But also, NATO became very active in projecting security outside of its own territory through operations. So with the core tasks of NATO that were especially enshrined in the Lisbon strategic concept as collective defense, cooperative security, and crisis management, the crisis management became a very, gave boost to a very active NATO that was working outside of the traditional transatlantic area. Now with ISAF over and with the Resolute Support Mission phasing out, with the fact that the environment has been changing, we're now facing a third phase in the development of NATO, and that is a post-operational phase where we have to respond to the new challenges in the security environment. And to the usual challenges, the asymmetric threats, the transborder threats that we all name, from the weapons of mass destruction, proliferation, the proliferation of small weapons, of trafficking in human beings, of diseases, of environmental damage, terrorism, of course. I would like to add to that also a couple of new threats. And one of the most challenging ones that I find is the threat to our values, the erosion of our values, the dissipation, the fragmentation, and the centrifugal forces that we have seen that have started to develop on the European continent, especially in the aftermath of last year's refugee migration crisis. First and foremost, we have seen an erosion of solidarity. We have seen finger pointing and blame shifting. And then in the aftermath of that, we have seen such developments as Brexit, and others that start to question the validity of the European Union and of NATO, and the fact whether should we be getting into a more layered, a core and a periphery European Union, and a threat that certainly could, if we're not mindful, undermine the the key concept of NATO, and that is solidarity. And this is what I expect of this summit, to demonstrate to the world, to the allies, to our public, and to the rest of the world, that we remain united, not just in our perception of threats, in our evaluation of the threats and the necessary responses, but that we remain united in solidarity with a common vision, a common strategy for Europe, for the Euro-Atlantic space, and for global peace and security. So what is ahead of us? Since you were asking for a national perception or a national position, I will concentrate a little bit more on the view from Croatia. Absolutely, defense and deterrence, collective defense remains the backbone of the alliance. And Croatia is ready to contribute. We support very much our increased presence and military posture in the east of Europe, responding to the challenges that come from the east, mostly in the destabilization of Ukraine and in Russia's actions in Ukraine, but also in potential behavior in some of the other countries that aspire or not aspire to become members of NATO. Secondly, in our posture towards the south, where an arc of instability ranges from the MENA region well into Asia, in terms of strengthening the defense and security capabilities and capacities of our partner nations, from Libya to Egypt to Iraq and others, but also in finally putting more effort collectively and individually into resolving the crisis, the conflicts that and other issues that plague the continent, that are also the root causes of the migration crisis that proved to be such a difficult issue for all of us in Europe last year. So, in looking from our perspective, Croatia will contribute with a military unit to our defense posture in Eastern Europe, or what I prefer to call Central Europe, ranging from the Baltic to the Adriatic to the Black Seas. In that context, as Fred has mentioned kindly, I have also initiated a new regional cooperation initiative that ranges from the Adriatic to the Baltic to the Black Seas. It is an initiative that is aimed at reconnecting the authentic Central Europe, as with the reunification, or what I prefer to call consolidation of Europe. We have built the east to west connections, but we need to build the north, or rebuild the north to south connections in terms of transportation infrastructure, in terms of energy infrastructure, energy security, and energy independence, which is of utmost importance not just for the competitiveness of our economies, but also for political stabilization of our countries. In terms of digitalization, but also business-to-business, people-to-people contacts, especially young people contacts, and last but not least, our discussions on the prospects for security and stability of our part of Europe. In addition to that, when we speak about Russia's influence, Croatia would especially like to emphasize Russia's influence in Southeast Europe. We normally talk about the Baltics or Poland or Romania or Bulgaria being under the influence of the Russian businesses, energy sector, and even displaying military might and military exercises. But that happens in Southeast Europe as well. And in the past few years, we have noticed several different types of influences, from strong economic and financial penetration to the penetration to trying to put some kind of influence onto our intelligence services. So from the economy to politics to intelligence, but also to the military aspect, where we have seen military exercises between our neighbor and friend Serbia and Russia several times so far. And there is one that is called Slavic Brotherhood that is planned for October of this year, and that especially worries us. So the alliance should be concerned about what goes in the southeast flank as well. And I think that the best response to that is to keep the open door, not just open, but really to make very concrete steps for the countries of Southeast Europe on the way to EU and in particular NATO membership. Bosnia and Herzegovina, the full activation of the MAP, membership action plan. I know that for some of you it's difficult to understand why a country cannot do something as simple as registering the military properties. Well, in Bosnia and Herzegovina it is complicated. We see Russian influence through Republika Srpska, which refuses to register the military properties. So a criterion that was set in Tallinn that seems so simple actually has proved not only to be very difficult or even impossible for Bosnia and Herzegovina to fulfill, but actually by insisting upon it without any concrete specification or recognition of what the rest of Bosnia and Herzegovina has been able to do. We're giving the key and the tools to the no side, or those who would like to keep Bosnia and Herzegovina back from Euro-Atlantic integration, to do that exactly. So from Croatia's standpoint, we really appeal to our friends and colleagues in NATO to activate MAP for Bosnia and Herzegovina fully and to set the country firmly on the way to EU and NATO membership. Resolution of the name issue for Macedonia, and of course continued progress of our neighboring countries into EU and NATO membership. I hope that even Serbia, who for political reasons has declared neutrality at the time, in some future will look at NATO prospects as an opportunity for them in at least taking our cooperation and a partnership between NATO and Serbia to a higher level. Of course, in this context, I very much welcome the upcoming accession of Montenegro. I am really very pleased about that. I think it's the right message, not just to the region of Southeast Europe and all the prospective countries, that with the proper fulfillment of the criteria, you will be able to exceed. But it's a message to any other third country that NATO accession is a matter that is for the candidate country and for NATO as an alliance to decide. We will not let anybody else, any third parties, to determine our future. We will not let the circumstances shape our views and shape us. We need to start shaping the circumstances, the situation through situational awareness, but also through firm action, as I've already stated in the beginning, through unity and solidarity as the greatest values, the greatest treasure that we have. Thank you.
We're going to take 2 questions from the audience, but before I do so, please welcome Prime Minister Đukanović and President Vionis. Good to have you with us, gentlemen. So I'll just take 2 questions from the audience. Please. And if you could identify yourself as well as take the question. And welcome as well to the delegations. Thank you so much for coming.
Sebulon Carlander, a future NATO Fellow of the Atlantic Council. Thank you, Madam President, for an excellent speech, and I would like you to expand further on security and stability in the Balkans, because I know that there's also a number of other issues, like the migrant crisis also affecting the region, and extremism and other issues. So could you speak a bit broader about security in the region and what role NATO and the EU can play other than through the open door policy? Thank you.
Thank you.
And let me ask the second question. I'm very interested, as you know, in what we call the North-South Corridor at the Atlantic Council, and you're calling the Adriatic-Baltic-Black Sea Initiative. If this works the way you would like it to work, what does it look like in 10 years?
Thank you very much. To expand a little bit further on security in Southeast Europe, of course, in addition to, as I've said, influence of Russia, but also some other third countries, we have seen a rise in extremist religious doctrines, especially Islam, extremist Islam. We have seen influences by some third states in the Gulf by Salafism, but also a number of fighters have gone from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and other countries to fight on the side of ISIL. Of course, when they come back, it's not just an issue of radicalization, but of integration of those people in society. So most certainly suffer from PTSD, from different levels of PTSD, who have been radicalized not just in the sense of religion and their ideological beliefs, but in the sense of the actions that they're ready or prepared to take. Of course, that is a threat to our security, but also the threat to our economies, as one can imagine what a terrorist attack would do to the tourism industry and the perception of stability of all of our countries. So together with the EU and with NATO, we need to work a lot harder on exchanging information, but also in determining the proper actions in how to reintegrate the people in the mainstream societies. If you just send them to prisons, unfortunately, the biggest danger is that they will further radicalize people who are with them. The second aspect is the media domain, especially with the new media and the social networks. The so-called war of ideas, or rather terrorist and religious extremist networks using the dissatisfaction of young people. We've seen the youth bulge in the Mediterranean produce first the Arab Spring, which turned into an Arab winter, and a lot of other issues that we're dealing with now in the MENA region. But there is a potential for that to happen in Southeast Europe as well if we're not careful and mindful, and if we are not vigilant in terms of not just trans-border and international threats, but what happens within our own societies as well. I have to say, and I always underline that the Islamic community in Croatia is really an exemplary community of integration, not assimilation, but integration of Muslims in the mainstream society, and working together with everybody else in Croatia for implementing the strategic development goals of the whole of Croatia. And I hope that through work with them, we will promote not just the true values of Islam, but the benefits that the Islamic communities can do in fostering not just local understanding, but international understanding, and in combating the root causes of instability that we see. Another potential threat is migrations. Now the so-called Western Balkans route has been closed, but with a potential explosion in the numbers of people going through our countries, that could certainly provoke instability. And as I've always said, there is absolutely no reason why migrants should travel the land routes, because they're not escaping the war from the first country of origin, but they are really, they've traveled several safe countries before they get to our own countries, and just not allowing for proper transportation and proper arrangements that would get these people to the countries who will take them and integrate them in their societies. I'm afraid that we're just supporting the human trafficking industry that has flourished, especially in the Mediterranean, and has caused thousands of deaths of people in the Mediterranean Sea. And there are numerous other issues, but that certainly, I think, could be a topic of an entirely different conference. And to respond to your question, Mr. Kemp, Fred, it's what I see in the future is certainly I stand on the position that we need more Europe rather than less Europe, more NATO rather than less NATO. So I do not support the concept of a core Europe and a periphery or a multi-layered Europe, but I do support regional cooperation that will lead to improvement of the physical circumstances that we live in, but also working together towards strengthening the European Union. So this initiative, it's not going to be formalized in terms of having a secretariat and a formal organization. This will be a platform for action, and what I'm hoping the concrete results will be concrete projects in energy, the LNG terminal in Krk, then building, connecting it with Świnoujście here in Poland, and to the Baltics, and building the reverse flow connections to Hungary and Ukraine, so decreasing everybody's dependency on on a single or a couple energy sources, and building more infrastructure, so more tourists, more people can travel around the region, and in that way connecting all of us, and again increasing the competitiveness of our economies, and just creating a better life for our peoples. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President.